Welcome to Groundbreaking Grief. This is a space where we break the silence, remove the shame, and dismantle the isolation that typically surrounds loss. I'm Desiree, a certified grief educator and coach. Groundbreaking Grief is a space where we have honest conversations about the pain and the growth that come with grief, enabling you to better understand yourself, others, and the world. Grief is a universal human experience. In this series, you'll learn ways to embrace it, grow through it, and find your way towards healing. Hey y'all, I am Desiree and I am a certified grief educator, and I have a special guest today that I want to introduce y'all to. She is a very special woman. Our paths crossed about a little over a year ago, and we were at a women's networking luncheon, and Anita came up to me and she was like, "So Desiree, what do you do?" And I said, "I work with people in grief. I'm a grief coach." And she just immediately said, "We should meet for lunch and we should stay connected." And throughout that meeting, I got to know what a special lady she is. And we've had lunch and shared some of our stories. And I'm bringing her back today because she and I initially talked about how people struggle to support others in grief. And so we're going to touch on that today, but we're also going to talk about different aspects of grief. Anita sells Juice Plus. She was at the women's networking meeting to promote her business, but she is just such a special, special lady, and we have formed a friendship, and we're here to talk about grief. I just want Anita to share with y'all a little bit about her journey. And Anita, do you want to share a little bit about yourself? Maybe stuff that I haven't touched on. What would you like to share about yourself?
Oh, it's so hard when you get asked a question like that. Tell about yourself. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been here for almost 45 years. I was married for 61 years, and my husband passed away he had COVID pneumonia and died. And I had COVID pneumonia and almost died. And that made a tremendous impact by the fact that I got through it, and very happily. My life has been many ups and downs, lots of different things happening. But three of the most traumatic things was the fact that I've lost my husband and two of my children. And that's made a tremendous impact. When a situation like that happens, you spend a lot of time in the quiet trying to figure out why. There isn't always an answer. All I knew was that I had to keep moving on and keeping busy. And for me, that was hard in the beginning, made a little bit easier. I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of people, and particularly, a lot of times people say, "What do you say to somebody that's just lost?" And my answer usually is, just say, "I'm so sorry." They don't expect an explanation on why the person passed or what's going on. Just say that I'm sorry. And that is sufficient enough, certainly in the beginning, is to say I'm sorry. The first experience that I had is that my 12-year-old daughter died in a car accident. And that was a long time ago. And then my husband died 4.5 years ago. And my son died last August of sepsis.
Yeah. And I had no idea when we got on the call. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And, why? I think I spent a lot of time just saying why. There's no answers.
Yeah.
All I know is that I have tremendous faith. I know that they are okay. I know I said somebody, I'm 91 years old now, so I may see them sooner than I thought I would. But I usually say it'll be reunion time when I die, because I know they'll be up there waiting for me.
Yeah. That brought me comfort. I shared with you that there was somebody in my family that we lost this week. and he was a relative on my father's side of my family, and they were very close. And my dad died 27 years ago, 26, 27 years ago. And I that brought us comfort to know that they're back together again.
Right.
And it's so interesting because like there's sometimes I struggle with faith or with a specific belief system. I'm a little what they call loosey goosey in terms of like my beliefs, but I do believe that their spirits live on, that our loved ones
Mhm.
continue to communicate with us in spirit when they pass. Um, I've had like way too many crazy coincidences for that not to be true. Um, and that brings me tremendous comfort. I remember after my dad passed, and that was a sudden passing, very much like you losing all of your losses were pretty sudden. I was sitting in the Barnes and Noble. I was a senior in college. It's like I have to find somebody to explain what's happening to me,
Yeah.
and maybe I'll find it in a book. I was talking to church leaders, anybody who would let me in their office to talk about, therapists. And I felt like I was just grasping for help and nobody could help me. And I remember just sitting in the aisle of the Barnes and Noble in like the grief section and just grabbing books off the shelves and starting to read them to see if it clicked. And hilariously, the one that helped me the most was from a medium who was talking about how he could communicate with people on the other side. And just the thought of that brought me so much comfort. And so it's about, I think a lot of grief is about finding what is going to work for you in
Hmm.
that moment to pull you through, to pull you forward. So, do you want to talk a little bit about your faith and how that's helped you in your healing journey?
Well, it got started when my daughter died, and I remember being so angry at the time because it was like, I'm a good mother and I've been trying to do the best thing for my children. It was my oldest child. And I mentioned just a short while ago before we started about the analogy of life is like a flowing river.
Hmm.
And I remember that I didn't know that analogy at that time, but I remember that she was 12 and all my neighbors and friends and everything, their 12-year-old daughters were going to proms and dances and getting all excited and everything. And I remember thinking, that's not fair because my daughter isn't going to be able to do that. And now when I think about it, I think that was probably the whole thing about life is like a flowing river. Life was going on for everybody, and I was stuck.
Yeah.
And my son was in the hospital at the same time. He was in the hospital for 3.5 months. He was in the car accident also. And I remember driving to the church, to the hospital one day. I'd cry all the way to the hospital. Then I'd put makeup on and I'd get looking really good. So then when I went in, because the poor guy was fighting for his life, he didn't need to have a sobbing mother come in. And I remember thinking to myself one day, oh my gosh, when I die and I see Allison and she says, why have you been so miserable? Because I'm so happy. And that really affected me. And from then on, I thought, I've got to be positive about this because look, I've got a husband and two other children, and I need to be positive for them because Allison's okay. And that was kind of the beginning of some of my feelings about that she's all right, but it's the other people that I have to be concerned about. And another interesting little thing, my daughter Dana was 8.5, and this was in 1972. And I remember they had at Christmas time. Greg was home in a hospital bed, and we were all sitting in the family room where the hospital bed was watching TV. And um, there was a terrible crash down in around Miami, I think around the Okefenokee Swamp or something, and a plane crashed. And all these people were in the airport waiting for that plane to come in. And Dana got up at 8:30 and went in the kitchen and started crying. And I said, "Oh, Dana, honey, you're crying for all those people that died." And she said, "No, I'm crying for the people in the airport waiting for their ones." And I thought, what wisdom out of an 8-year-old child's mouth that, yes, that's it. Those people are okay. It's the ones left behind.
Yeah.
And you start thinking about this whole grief process. And then when my husband died, he was 93. He had had a lot of issues, and we were both struggling. I made it, he didn't. But I knew that he didn't have to deal with all that other stuff that he had been dealing with. With my son, this has been the
It
hardest
has been.
because he wasn't, he was busy, he had a wonderful job, he was married, things were going along so well. So that whole thing about life is like a flowing river, you know, all these things have happened and yet we're still flowing along.
Yeah. And
And it makes you think of the whole perspective of, and then I must admit, I've been listening to a lot of YouTube about communicating. You know, my mother-in-law said to me one time after Allison died, because Allison was so prolific in her writing, and I said to my mother-in-law, "Oh, we're missing out on all of her writing." And she said, "No, you're not." She said, "We're energy, all energy, and you cannot destroy energy." And that made so much sense to me. So I guess I've gained a lot of knowledge, strength, wisdom from those experiences from my age. And so this is kind of where I am. And
but I
do I
think
miss them? Terrible.
yeah. Yeah.
Has it been an impact on my life? Definitely. Has it destroyed me? No. I'm still going on. And I have
Grief
another daughter and I have grandchildren, and life is good. Life is good. And I'm healthy. Somebody said, "How do you get to 91?" I said, "Well, you kind of start off with one, and then you're two, and all of a sudden, there you are, 91."
you just
It
keep going.
happens very fast. That river is really flowing.
Ah, grief changes us. It changes
Grief,
us.
yeah, it does. Definitely, grief has. I know people that have gotten stuck and they haven't moved on
Yeah.
for different and various reasons. I, I don't know. I talk to them. I try to make them realize that their loved one is okay, but for some reason or other, they're stuck. And I feel sadly for them because, you know, life is good. I mean, this is the life that we have, and this is what we're supposed to do. So,
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. So you have so much wisdom and your perspective, and you just, you're positive, but you're not too like, it's just, you've got such a positive output, but it's not one of those like, everything's great. It's like,
yeah,
yeah, life is painful, but I'm still in the river, and I'm putting one foot in front of the other. And I think that when we are tested in times of grief,
Yeah.
it really tests us to say, like, do you want to get back up? Like, there are some days where you don't, but for people that have experienced a loss very close to them, there's not a day that goes by that they don't think about their loved one.
Well,
Every single day.
you don't forget.
Yeah.
You don't forget. You never forget. Another analogy that I used to use, this is kind of weird, but I used to think of it as almost like, if you have a sore on your arm and then you have a scab,
Yeah.
and that scab protects this sore. And then every once in a while, something happens and the scab gets knocked off,
Yeah.
and that sore is back.
Yeah.
And I kind of think of that. It sort of is the way grief is. You go along, and then all of a sudden somebody says something, and it's like it puts you right back.
Yeah. I think when you shared about the story about your daughter and how you were watching all of her friends grow up and you were missing that. And um that's something that I've talked about with people, that have also experienced losses. Um is sometimes I look back and I'm jealous of people who had their dad for longer or still have their parents, and um because those were my close losses. And it's sometimes you like, I feel guilty about that, and I'm like, well, I'm a human being and I have complex emotions. And
Yeah.
so one of the keys, and I think maybe why people get stuck, there's a couple of theories that I have, and it's hard to tell without talking to somebody why they might be stuck. Um, but there's a lot of research that's coming out about how we store these emotions in our bodies. And there's a word called, like, somatic, like you'll hear somatic therapy or doing some somatic work. And that is to help you release those emotions that are stored in your body. So that might be something that would be helpful to someone who might feel stuck, but also, like, having someone to witness their grief to help them feel heard. I think a lot of people in grief don't feel understood or heard, and they may not understand what's coming up for them. Because it can be really confusing, but you never forget the love that
Oh,
you have
God,
for that
no.
person.
Mm-mm. You
Do you
really
want to
don't.
share the quote that you read before we started recording about grief? Do you have
Okay,
it handy?
yes.
Okay.
Grief never ends, but it changes. It's a passage, not a place to stay. Grief is not a sign of weakness, nor a lack of faith. It's the price of love. And that's what happens when a loved one dies. The love is still there, and that's why you're grieving.
Yeah. I've heard it described as love with no place to go.
Right.
And so it feels kind of like, it can feel challenging or empty sometimes. But it is, when you recognize that it is love. Um, and David Kessler is my mentor. He's the person that I study grief with. Coincidentally, I'm pretty sure I read tried to read one of his books that day in Barnes and Noble when I was in, the raw part of my grief of processing the loss of my dad, and nothing was getting through. And then 20 some odd years later, I take a grief educator class, and it all starts to make
Yeah.
sense. But he talks about how grief is the universal human experience. If we love, we're all going to grieve at some point. And instead of it being a divisive thing where people are afraid to talk about it, I would love to encourage people to use it as a point of connection with others,
Mm-hmm.
because we're all going to grieve at some point. And if we can,
It's inevitable
Mhm.
that I once heard that when you lose your parents, you lose your past. When you lose your children, you lose your future,
Yeah.
which is kind of poignant in a sense. The other thing, and everybody grieves differently.
Yes.
So it's not a one time thing. It's not like this is what you do and this. this will help. It's everybody's different. For me, reaching out was what I do. When I have a problem, I talk to people. Uh, Other people, when they have problems, they keep it inside. But I happen to. After Allison died, I joined and well, when I moved to Atlanta, I joined a group called Compassionate Friends,
Mhm.
and that's for families that have lost children. And then I ended up facilitating the group for about 4 or 5 years. And one of the things about that is that people can come there. We've all had the same experience. We're grieving differently, but we've all lost a child. We can cry. Everything stays right in the group, and we can feel comfortable in knowing that we're not alone. And that was very helpful
Yeah.
uh, to have somebody like that. One time, a woman came, and we go around the group and tell our little story, and she said that her daughter was missing. And we all thought, we know where our children are. That that was devastating. She never came back because she realized that this wasn't the group for her. But you know, that was really horrible. I mean, to think about your child being missing.
Yeah, sometimes the lack of clarity can be even more
Right.
painful.
There's no closure on that.
Yeah.
But getting it, but if you're so inclined, talking to people and talking about your sadness and grief, and about your child, whoever, your husband, your best friend, it it's still grief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
David Kessler added he worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and they came up with those stages of grief. And the stages are not linear, like you don't go through one stage and then the next. But with the permission of her family, because she's since passed, he came up with another stage of grief called finding meaning. And
Yeah.
he wrote a book about it. And the goal of finding meaning is to remember with more love than pain. And I think it's such an interesting stage because and it's not linear. Like some days you're going to remember with more pain than love. But if you can find some part of it, of that journey, that you can hang on to, and sometimes people turn it into their passion. I mean, I'm kind of passionate about helping people through grief. I was talking to somebody the other day and she was like, "Oh, you're really passionate about this." And I was like, "Yeah, I I'm like employers should pay for grief education and healing after bereavement. I really believe that.
Yeah.
Um, it should be a benefit, and they should have trained grief educators and grief programs that people can go through because it impacts their employees' productivity and their life. And if we care about the well-being of our employees, then that's something that I think companies
Mhm.
should be more widespread. Um, and so we can turn that grief into a passion or into a way to help other people. And it helps us heal, but it also helps the collective of society and the world. So, what would you like to say to people who might feel like a little bit hopeless right now? Like maybe they're in the raw part of losing someone.
On how to deal,
Like
just be,
what brings you hope on the days where you're struggling?
what brings me hope.
Mhm.
Well, there again, as I mentioned, I have a tremendous faith.
Mhm.
And I and interestingly enough, because I had COVID and was really, really sick, they didn't know whether I would make it or not. And I did. And I came away saying, because I'd really prayed hard, that God really answers prayers. And so I'm looking at life as a gift. I think that's the way I think about it. I think about every day as a gift. And some days are good and some days aren't good, but you just, perhaps the word that comes to me is gratitude. Is just to be grateful for what you have. And that gives me hope. And I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, but I'm very grateful for today. And so I try to live my life that way.
Mhm.
And yeah, you always have to be intentional about it. It doesn't just happen. You know, you really have to think about it and think about lots of things going on that are sad or hurtful or whatever. But I just have to feel like that I'm okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that I think that perhaps that's what gives me hope, is that I'm okay
It's like a little gratitude garden that you've
with
got to
with
tend every
with
day.
gratitude. I mean, I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for my friends. I'm grateful for where I live. There are a lot of things
Yeah.
that I'm grateful for. And yeah, all the other things happen, but I can't do anything about that.
Yeah.
I just have to stay with where I am and just hoping that things will work out.
Yeah.
That's just kind of what's going on with me right now.
Awesome. Thank you for joining me today, Anita, and thank you for sharing your wisdom. I really think it's going to help people, and thank you for sharing your story.
Okay, well, I was glad to do it. I'm not sure how much wisdom I shared, but this is how I live my life, and this is working. for
Awesome.
me.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Groundbreaking Grief. Remember, grief isn't something to hide from, it's part of being human, and when we meet it with honesty and compassion, it can transform us. If this conversation spoke to you, please share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone. I invite you to visit my website, thegoodgriefgirl.com, and connect with me for resources to help you with your grief. Until next time, keep embracing your journey and growing through the hard times.